In this episode of the Flick Lab International Film Podcast, a Chinese man has a beautiful haircut.
You could have just been like, who, huh, what is it good for?
It's good for...
It's good for 5.5 hours of film.
At least, touching on almost 6 hours.
Yep. Woo boy, it's gonna be a longie once again, tonight.
Gonna have some rum tonight.
Yeah. Welcome to this side of film podcast.
Well, when it comes to creative ways of getting back to Korea, here you go, Henrik, once again.
Well, I must say, this is semi-creative way to get back into Korea. We use China as a proxy nation. And technically are like, well, North Korea still is Korea. We're really getting back to our roots here.
And China might be going like, well, technically the North Korea or the Korean peninsula belongs to China. Just kind of our province, so let's help North Korea out. It's ours after all.
Yeah. Technically there is only true and correct and the false Korea.
Yeah. These are, though, the feelings that I've got from the Chinese officials behind doors towards North Korea, how they behave towards the Korean peninsula. It's basically ours. But hey, speaking of something fun, it's coming to the 73-year anniversary of North Korea invading South Korea. Or how does it actually go? Actually.
Hooray! Happy birthday, North Korea.
Yeah, June 25th, 1950. That was the glorious day of driving the pigs out of the vicinity.
Yeah. You really showed the capitalist bastards there, now didn't you, comrades?
Yeah, so what better time to watch some educational videos on the matter?
In this podcast, in this event, in the said podcast, there is no way forced onto us by one nation who shall not be named for security reasons.
Yeah, it's kind of like a voluntary thing, just like the Chinese army in this war.
Yups.
But so, this is the #1 film, highest grossing film of all time in China. And
that says a lot about China.
At least if you're looking at the official records. And then there's part 2 of this movie, and that seems to be, according to Wikipedia, on the 9th most successful movie of all time. And depending on where you're getting your statistics from, it's either the first or the third most successful movie in 2022.
Still, when it comes to the box office difference between the two movies, part 1 and part 2, there is a really noticeable drop. Like, I know that the sequel usually is a harder sell than the first one, and I do know that basically, when it comes to, for example, movie theater box office performance, there is like the first weekend or post-first weekend drop, etc., etc., etc. But I was still semi-shocked to see exactly how hard the box office of the part 2 fell when you compare it to the first one.
And this gives us a nice opportunity to delve deeper into why that may have been. Or was it just Western propaganda to infiltrate the box office numbers?
That scenario, I know that you say it as a jest here, and we play it for laughs, but but still, like, that also wouldn't be a completely unbelievable scenario, seeing how hard Hollywood wants to push to the Chinese market.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Marvel cape shit that they have to currently project in the Chinese box office territory, and therefore, like, trying to heavily push Hollywood features in China, even with the cost of downplaying China's own productions, could actually be something that I could see from Marvel these days, Disney, for example, attempting.
Well, yeah, maybe this is a good discussion point. The American films have definitely penetrated the Chinese market from time to time. In the last 3 to 4 years, not so much. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to back this up, but it kind of looks like the market is manipulated by preventing the foreign films from gaining that visibility that they have enjoyed before, apparently. And if so, well, China, of course, has its own interests to show its own movies around the globe. Well, then there are some of these Malaysian bastards that just outright ban these communist propaganda movies. But I would imagine that China has aspirations to also get their movies out in the States, but seems like it's been a very, very small spread of market for their movies there, like a couple of film festivals, things like that.
And that's a good segue into today's film. The Chinese feature that was meant, or has been meant, in my opinion, most definitely for the global markets.
Yes, you're right. When I started watching this, I was actually expecting very heavy propaganda regarding how they are showing the American troops, or the UN troops, if you will, in this movie. And it wasn't as, shall we say, dastardly as one might think.
No, it was, to be honest, it was surprisingly lenient in its approach of how it depicted the US troops. So you can kind of say that at the end of the day, when it comes to the cinematic battle of Lake Changjin, and the whole battle at box office, the real victory is the capitalistic system and the American dollar.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. If you look at the comments online, and there are these compilations of clips where the film is depicting the US troops, and most of the comments from what seems to be Americans, not necessarily Americans, but let's say they are Americans, they seem to be pretty happy about their depiction, like as good as it can get.
Yeah, and I actually can't completely fault the Americans there. Like mentioned, the depiction of the American troops, for the most part, is actually quite understanding, if not even go as far as to say a positive presentation. The only kind of exception to the rule, in my opinion, is the portrayal of MacArthur. And, well, MacArthur as a general was, pretty much everybody at these days, and already back in the day did agree, was somewhat a pack of dicks. So he's a kind of an easy target to make this almost comedical buffoon character.
Yeah. Going back a bit about the whole background of the film. So this is directed by 3 people. First I was thinking that there's maybe only one person who is really in charge, and then the rest of the guys are kind of background forces, but I'm not so sure about that anymore after reading about this. Because first of all, we have Chen Kaige, who is an extremely well-known Chinese director, has directed a bunch of big movies, and of course in the West, most known in the West for Farewell My Concubine, I would say, from 1993. Interesting guy. I know that in his childhood, when he was 14 years old, he publicly denounced his father to some of the Chinese revolutionaries in 1966 or thereabouts, because he was in some kind of a political trouble, the dad, and then, instead of jeopardizing his studies, he decided to just give his dad out for some of his misdeeds that existed or then didn't. Chen Kaige is also a guy who listened to classical music secretly in a warehouse during the 1966 revolution, and it's a director who believes it's wrong to believe in a person as a god, from all I can tell. And then this would suggest this would extend to the Communist Party and Mao. And now we have a guy, the same guy, Chen Kaige, who is in the director's chair in this movie, which I find really interesting. And it gets even more interesting if you look at the second director of the film, Tsui Hark, known as a director-writer Vietnamese born, moved to Hong Kong when he was 14, made experimental movies since he was age 13, seen as one of the pioneers of Hong Kongese cinema, this kung fu action filmmaker. And I would say not exactly known for sucking to the commies. He did these controversial films like Dangerous Encounters of the First Kind. Then he created his own very successful production company to tell exactly the kinds of stories that he would like to tell, to have less control around him. But yeah, then he goes and puts his name on a pure Chinese party propaganda project. It's fascinating. Another Hong Kongese guy, Dante Lam, the third director, the final director here. He's a director, actor, producer, choreographer, all in all a filmmaker. And he was the director of the mega super hit 2018 film Operation Red Sea, second highest grossing movie ever in China. And so, these are the faces, apparently, of a big propaganda blockbuster. What do you think about that?
Well, you presented the scenario. You stated that you at first you suspected that the way how the production would have run would have been that there's one guy on the director's chair directing most of the production, and then the rest, the two remaining directors would kind of be directors more in name only sense here. And I'm kind of with you on the take that most likely is not in the end what happened, because I am previously familiar with two of these directors, that being Chen Kaige and Chui Hark. I don't remember if I've ever actually seen anything from Dante Lam, but I can kind of, in these films, I can see the fingerprints of at least Kaige and Hark. Like Chen Kaige, I see most of him, and please bear in mind that I don't actually know. I didn't find any official sources about which director directed what in these movies.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, but going with just a kind of a hunch, or the feeling that I got from the film, I would say that Kaige has profiled himself through epic melodramas.
Yeah.
That shows large scenes and has like a NPC cast of hundreds. So I would say The Promise is perhaps the best, most well-known example of this type of epic filmmaking. And he's also a director who has experience on showing and directing more smaller, more personal, and more intimate tear-jerking drama.
He is also known for doing that until the year of 2005, when it seems that he kind of changed gears radically and started to make these more blockbusterish, more mainstream movies, including wuxia movies.
Yeah, along those lines. I only have followed him to 2005. Like, The Promise is the last film from him that exists in my personal library.
Yeah.
But yeah, Promise, The Emperor and the Assassin together, they basically all have elements that I can find in the Battle of Lake Changjin. Like, I can see Kaige when it comes to the first movies, first hour, where we have the dramatic elements between the characters, and also when we are shown, before they get into the actual battles, and we are shown these huge vistas, the mountain range, and these squadrons just walking through the mountain range, I can see him in those moments. Chui Hark, on the other hand, like you remarked, is best known as an action director. Someone who kind of fuses, and who often has fused, kind of fantasy elements and wuxia, and then more realistic, more hardcore hitting action. Chinese, Once Upon a Time in China, the Quad trilogy, perhaps in the West, best known example from Hark. And I actually I see Hark's fingerprints in many of the action scenes throughout the two movies. when it comes to actually pinpointing what Lamb would have contributed into the production, I can't actually say, but knowing his previous some of his previous films by the genre and by name, like The Twins Effect, for example, which was a martial arts comedy horror film, and then from there transitioned into more serious action movies and psychological thrillers, I would say that I would suspect that Lamb would have played a part also in the action scenes, perhaps more in the second film, when they are attacking the bridge. I would, like, my gut feeling is that Lamb would have been more prominent during those fight scenes. But like I said, that's just a gut feeling. But I do, from 3 directors, I can kind of pinpoint where I strongly suspect that at least 2 of them have been prominent as directors.
Well, at least he has had his hand on Lamb on the Hong Kong police force propaganda videos to kind of ease up the Hong Kong protests a couple of years ago, interestingly. So, yeah, coming back to the movie, if I had to go on a limb, as he's an action choreographer, maybe he brought a lot of elements to the fighting scenes.
Most likely, that would be where I would place Lamb.
Yeah.
As a director, kind of a like co-action director with Hark.
I guess this leads us naturally to the propaganda and what it is here, how heinous it is, whether it is warranted. Well, yeah, what kind of propaganda do we have here? I think there's kind of a lot to open up about it. Actually, this might be most interesting for our listeners from China who are listening to film podcasters from the West and just seeing their views on the material, as we don't dabble on Chinese cinema on a daily basis. But so, a film that seems to be the product of the US-China power play of late. That's at least seems to be the Western consensus, that this is a baby born out of the little schisms of late. And it highlights the sufferings of the Chinese in the battlefield and kind of forgets about the whole sufferings of the Koreans. Well, I don't recall the Koreans being in any of the battles. There might have been some Koreans there, but really it's just the Chinese versus the big bad US.
Yeah. In defense of the decision of kind of forgetting the Koreans from the equation here, as when it came to doing the backgrounds on the film, it appeared that the general gist worldwide is that this basically the conflict that these 2 films depict, it was solemnly fought between Chinese and the American troops.
Well, I guess that might be fair, that specifically the battles around Changjin or Changjin Lake would be between mostly the US and the Chinese. What I found as well is that it makes Americans look in comparison well off, even with food, the rations to their bases, things like that. The military gear is, and it's even made into a piece of dialogue in one of the movies, that, yeah, maybe someday we will get as good gear as our enemy has. It's just a matter of time.
It's kind of unmentioned running theme throughout the 2 films.
Yeah.
Of course, there is the scene where the American air raid bombs the transportation trains of the Chinese troops, which is the moment where they lose most of their stuff, food, gear, guns and ammunition. But after the raid, basically the rest of the movie is just the Chinese trying to capture whatever equipment they can from the Americans and then using the Americans' own equipment against them. Yeah. It's what happens with the artillery. It almost is what happens with guns. For some reason, they just, in the end, they choose not to steal the American firearms for themselves. And it's also what happens, especially in the second film, when it comes to food rations.
Right.
The Chinese forces have already used all their food rations. Now they are starving. So once they finally hit the airfield, they kind of land a temporary jackpot as they can get their hands on some of the American food rations.
Yeah, that is a well-known fact that at least the CCP army didn't have as good military gear, and there's some pieces of dialogue that are questionable. Of course, it's coming from a Chinese perspective once again, let's remember that, but lines about how basically the movie makes the suggestion that the Americans look like they are reflecting on their choices, why they came here. Maybe we should think this through again. Some of those dialogues from the commanders are in that nature. And it makes America look like they started the war, actually, in my opinion, and attacked.
It showcases American air bombers bombing Chinese territory when they attack against North Korea.
Yep.
Like one of those bombing raids is shown going across North Korea-Chinese border and hitting Chinese targets. Which, well, the history is kind of wonky here. Did that actually happen? You can get two contradicting statements. Some, I strongly suspect American sources claim that most definitely did not happen. They only bombed North Korean targets. And then you have other sources, don't know from where, stating that yeah, American bombers did hit Chinese targets before China entered the conflict, and at least targets like medium-sized city and the Yalu River Bridge. On top of that, the film also, through dialogue, it emphasizes the Chinese fears that once Americans get hold of Pyongyang and North Korea, they would continue their advance over Chinese border, and then they would just continue the attack into Chinese soil. And that is one of the reasonings that the Chinese government here uses why they feel that they have to enter the war. Like, they have to stop the Americans now, so that they later on, after the fall of North Korea, they wouldn't have to then face Americans in a China-America war.
Yeah, that sounding, of course, completely ridiculous, put into perspective as well when you know that Truman was extremely against the use of A-bomb in this war. It's never...
Yeah, then again, in the film's defense, MacArthur himself was not. In fact, everybody agrees that MacArthur was demanding Truman to even use nuclear weapons.
I checked on this, and it seems that there is no documentation of him ever asking from Truman, first of all, whether there would be a chance that an A-bomb would be required during the conflict, and secondly, there seems to be no historical evidence that he ever demanded or requested directly that, hey, we need to use A-bombs.
Okay, because my sources on the other hand say that that is precisely the reason why Truman eventually let go of MacArthur and replaced him with another commander.
I know that they had their disagreements, and I understand the problem was that MacArthur went public with his grievances with Truman's leadership, or to phrase it better, he didn't agree with some of the commands or thinking that Truman held at that time. Therefore, it was Truman's decision then to kick MacArthur out. But, nobody of course knows whether A-bomb was one of those things that rubbed him the wrong way, but I couldn't find any evidence of that.
Okay. Because on the other hand, I found a lot of, well, not direct evidence, not like an official memo, but a lot of sources that did make the claim that Truman was demanding using A-bomb in Korea, and later on against China.
Well, the movie definitely makes its best attempt to make Douglas MacArthur looked like some kind of a, as phrased by some YouTube commenter, like a Metal Gear Solid type of villain in this movie. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is, of course, he was kind of the, would I say, the Pacific Theater leader, this extremely decorated World War I, World War II military leader, and you name it, conflict leader, and a veteran. Also dabbled in some Philippine business.
So, be it the Filipinos or be it the President of the United States, nobody who came in contact with MacArthur could actually stand the guy.
At the end of the day, I think MacArthur is seen as in positive light here in the Philippines, where I'm right now. He actually did make some mistakes. I'm not sure if it was quite mentioned in the films, but yeah, it's true that he also didn't properly anticipate the Japanese full-blown attack on the Philippines. So, and Douglas MacArthur actually was kind of some kind of a de facto effective ruler and leader of Japan during the occupation period from 1945 to 1951. So this is a guy who has the kind of military experience in the United States Army that no one else has and will hopefully never have ever again. Very interesting. But and you were saying that the US was bombing some of the Chinese troops near the Chinese border.
I found contradicting sources on that claim, yeah.
Gotcha. That the US or the UN forces did not get quite anywhere near the Chinese border yet. Yeah, sure, okay, the troops were at some points visible from the Chinese side of the border, but if they were up to the latitudes of, say, Songan, roughly, that's still probably like 100 kilometers to the border. They were never right at the border. So
it sounds like you have been listening to some capitalistic dogs.
Yeah, damn those capitalistic dogs, always messing with my mind.
God damn it, Karri.
Yeah, but
I have to cross you over from my comrade list.
Yeah, but the thing, how the movie presents the whole thing is that the great Chinese Civil War has now ended, and this great military hero comes back home, but he's called immediately back to the front lines because of the Korean War. And
yeah, Chinese in the film, Chinese decision to enter the conflict is something that they would not want to do, but they feel compelled that they have to do, and B is done out of the interest of self-preservation.
I will tell you that after the June 25th, when the North Korea and the Kim family regime, when they attacked South Korea, that was completely their own decision. And Kim Il-sung himself dragged China into this conflict. If they ever needed to get involved, well, shit, that was that. And as far as I know, Beijing was not happy to get involved into this.
I have no sources to the contradictory, but just in order to pick a fight with you, I go with the movie. Yeah, Beijing was in no way excited or happy to join the conflict and start a bigger war against the US, but they did, and they choose to do it on their own free will, and North Korean leadership in no way forcefully tracked them into the conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of the kindness of their hearts, Mao's beautiful heart.
Someone had to stop
the
capitalistic dogs in order to actually save the rest of the world and halt the destructive spread of capitalism.
It was really heartwarming, Henrik, when we saw Mao in this movie, and at the porch of this house, which I probably should know what it is, he's talking to his eldest son, and he is so heartwarmingly telling him that, yeah, you can go, you have my blessing, with a big hearty smile. You know what happened to that eldest son in the war? He died.
Unfortunately, I do know what happened to the eldest son.
Actually, it's shown in the film.
Because by jolly, if this film does not stop itself on the dead on the tracks to give you the scene where that son dies.
Yep.
Completely unnecessary and comes completely out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, in a war film where you see hundreds, if not thousands of people dying, just as you know, faceless, nameless NPCs throughout the conflict, then you have this one scene where the eldest son dies in a completely avoidable and dumbstruck moment. He runs into a bloody air raid bombing on God of his own free will and dies there, and then the film has, like, what was his name? And the music swells, and you know that this is the moment where you are supposed to tear up. Just completely dead inside.
I kept wondering, why is this guy in this Max Payne type of slow motion scene avoiding all the flying particles and flying pieces of glass? Why is he smiling? And then I waited a while and that's why.
Because he knew that this was his moment.
Defend the motherland.
Dude was so fast that he was able to outrun the flying particles and the flames and the debris, but he could not outrun a full-blown bomb blast.
So can we now jump in this very cohesive podcast episode to the moments of the heroic CCP forces when they are frozen in position, still in a shooting position, ready to fire. I don't have anything to back this up, whether it happened or not, but
it was a nice visual.
It was a nice visual.
I appreciated the image. Please don't misquote me and don't take me in the wrong way. Please, I still need my Chinese citizenship even after this episode airs. But like I appreciated the filmography in that moment.
Yeah, we appreciated the historical inaccuracies at that moment. We don't know. We don't know.
I found no sources that would contradict the film's depiction that a small group of Chinese soldiers were so determined to stay on their place and ambush the retreating American forces that they literally froze to death on their position.
I would like to find a memo where somebody wrote that, okay, now it was Douglas MacArthur or whoever it was today, the general of the US Army or some military leader dude, woke from his bed, went to see some frozen in position Chinese soldiers and took off his hat in respect.
Like, just put yourself in the shoes of those Chinese soldiers.
Well,
it's minus 30, if not even lower. You're absolutely like you're freezing to your bones, almost frozen stiff. You kind of see, you kind of already feel that it becomes harder to breathe. You feel that you have constantly it's colder than it should be, and you see how at the edges of your vision the lights get darker and darker, and you get the feeling that this might be it. I might actually freeze to death. And you start to wonder that should I actually move a little bit to raise my body temperature at least just one notch,
Nope.
And then you are like, no, because the Americans might show up any second now, and you just stay put.
Yeah, I'm about to freeze to death. What's the first thing on my mind? To defend the motherland. Except not the motherland, someone else's land. Well, carry on. But yeah, I wouldn't want to put myself in the shoes of these guys. Minus 40 Celsius was fact of life on some of those nights. Feet freezing, unable to walk at some point. But hey, where were we? A lot of fun. There's some real hatred towards Christmas here, Henrik. And I know, of course, it's symbolizing the quote-unquote presumptuous attempt of the piggies to end the war by Christmas. And looks like China prevented that. So fair enough, but it's used many times. This reference to Christmas. There's Christmas trees falling. There are some these opinionated claims, of course, in the end titles, instead of showing something about the statistics of the war or something like that, some stone cold numbers. I'm perfectly aware that this doesn't happen in the American movies either all of the time, or even most of the time. But, you could have just said some numbers and casualties on both sides, and something about, like, both sides were suffering greatly. The end. But no, there's, like, nationalistic, uplifting propaganda there for you.
Then again, once again, in the film's defense, those opinionated statements at the very end of the movie, I make the claim that that's actually the most propaganda that you get. Or that those are the moments where the film gets most propagandistic.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, that there's kind of two minds about whether the whole Changjin Reservoir was a Chinese defeat or a Chinese victory or none of the above.
Yeah, it's very much who you ask from that situation.
Yeah, but there is the fact that the U.S. troops did retreat from the Changjin region, the lake that surrounds all the nearby towns, and they retreated quite far. They retreated...
Yeah, all the way to South Korea.
Yeah, but firstly they retreated to Hamhung, which is still in North Korea. They started to be surrounded by the Chinese forces from every side. So then they took several days to evacuate their troops from Hamhung and take the boat for 3 days back to the South Korea to the other side of the 38th parallel. And bringing with them a lot of civilians as well, which is kind of a nice touch.
Yeah, another noticeable thing historically wise is that even the American military leadership, actually, at least on part of some of its members, I don't know if it is the official stand of the Marine Corps, but anyway, at least some of the generals in US Army have made the statement that the thing that truly did save the US forces was the extremely freezing temperatures. And if it hadn't been so goddamn cold, it could have been that US forces could have suffered even more heavy losses than they actually did.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that Chinese gave a really formidable opposing force on their part, and there's a lot of testimonies from the US soldiers as well that they were fighting like crazy. But yeah, to come back to the whole Hamhung thing, I think the whole retreat to Hamhung, that's clearly a retreat. Well, several hundreds of kilometers from what I can tell, from near the Munan-ni region all the way to Hamhung. Come on, that's a retreat. Even if General Smith was saying something like, or at least has been rumored to say something along the lines of, hell no, we are not retreating, we're just attacking from a different direction. Yeah, it's a retreat. Needless to say, this film has also caused anger in Korea. But I think that's enough for propaganda for the moment. Well, did you know that Neil Armstrong was also in the Korean War? Many people were in the Korean War, but yeah, Neil Armstrong was there as well. You know, he came from the Air Force very much, and then worked his way into what then became to be what's called now NASA.
So first he retreats from Korea, and then he retreats from the moon.
Yeah, quite the turnover. Acting. The Americans and their acting. That's quite terrible, isn't it, Henrik? The dialogue is just freaking awful. Just the written dialogue, not only, but the way that it's spoken. The performance.
I don't actually... No, I didn't pay that much attention to the American acting here.
It's so in your face bad, in my opinion.
I have to confess, most of the time I was bored out of my mind in a way that...
Fair.
Actually, American acting kind of made to skip my eyes. I was checking out my clock whenever Americans showed up. The truth is that for this movie, the Chinese government in no way did it go out of its way to headhunt some top-notch, A-tier American high talent actors for these roles.
No.
They are very much rather unknown American actors, many of whose career mostly consists of being the bad guys in Chinese movies.
I haven't checked, but if I had to guess, these are this kind of your select few American or American English speaking people, actors on demand as the kind of the Western bad guys or Western whatever in your Southeast Asian or East Asian movies.
Yeah. I mean, South Korea managed to nab Liam Neeson for Operation Chromite. And there's no American actor of that capacity in this film.
No.
But the best one, in my opinion, when it comes to the American cast, would have to be John F. Cruz, who is the guy who plays Major General Smith, aka the American commander that gets the most positive depiction in the film. The one who salutes the frozen Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say he gives the best performance. The one who gives the worst one would be the guy playing MacArthur. But that also is a performance where I do feel that the film doesn't give any leeway, does in no way make that performance or that role any easier for the actor.
Yeah.
Because even the film kind of wants to portray MacArthur as this downright comedy movie level of a dumbass.
Yeah.
And even after that only gives him like 2 scenes in 2 films.
You were saying that you were bored out of your mind, or more or less, during the film or the films. So I guess let's get to that. So yeah, especially I would say that the first movie, but also the second movie, that they are boring, and there are reasons for that. There's literally no character development for most of the time, and whenever there is any kind of character development, it's the easiest sort, kind of a stock character development.
And this is the moment where we have to, in my opinion, address the fact that, yes, I know, officially this is two different movies. It's better that Lake Changjin I and II, and the second one had a secondary title. And I know that that's how we are going to name this episode. I know that that's how we are going to present these movies in the YouTube thumbnail, most likely. But anyone listening who hasn't yet checked these movies out, be mindful that in reality, these are just one movie.
Yeah.
One almost 6-hour movie. It has gotten that part 1, part 2 treatment where they have shot the whole thing back to back in one go, and then at the editing booth they just forcefully chop it in 2. And the hallmarks are all over the place. The first part starts with this highlight reel that has snippets from the second movie already showing you small clips from it. The ending, when you get the propagandistic statements at the end of the first film, a large part of the footage that is being shown to you is from the second movie. And that is a problem. The reason why I'm highlighting it here so forcefully is the fact that that is a problem that comes into play when it comes to the characters and when it comes to the character arcs. Because the characters, the little setup the characters get, it happens in the first film, which lasts for 3 hours, and then at the very end of the second film you have the little payoff to the character arcs that you actually managed to get here.
Yep.
So, by God, if your experience is that you check the first film or the second film first, you will be you don't know that there's a big brother and little brother at the battlefield. That the whole skipping stone thing at the very end of the second film that means nothing to you because you don't have the setup, you don't know what the skipping stones means, why it's supposed to be somehow important. You don't know what is the importance of after the squadron has been destroyed except for one man, and that one man comes up and states that, you know, that the 7th regiment is present in the force of one man. You don't actually know what that means if you haven't seen the first film first. There's basically, it's not much payoff at the end.
Yeah.
It's really lackluster stuff, but even that little lackluster payoff means nothing if you haven't first seen the first film.
Yeah, that's kind of a catch-22 situation here. We have the first movie, like you said, it has the setup. But then because the payoff is on the second movie, I can't really recommend even to watch the second movie as the only movie out of these. And I would say that that second movie is definitely better than the first one. But if you haven't seen the first one, then maybe the payoff doesn't really work. But still, the second movie is more entertaining.
Okay, because I'm completely on the other side on that argument. I strong-heartedly feel that the first movie is the better of the two.
I strong-heartedly felt that the action was more varied and more interesting in the second one. And I would say that the location was also more interesting.
The location perhaps was more interesting in the second one. But I felt that the action was not necessarily better, but not as boring in the first one. And also, the first one still has that first hour of the movie, which is where most of the characterization actually happens.
Yeah.
That's where you get the personal drama between these characters, and where you get to see at least partly what these characters are made of. The little you actually get that in this film. There's actually, like, the first film has, in my opinion, a dead zone moment, which happens after the first hour. After they start to cross the rocky field, and the US Air Force starts to fly over them, and they have to pretend that they are dead and lying amongst the rocks.
Yeah.
They need to be dead, and like that scene to me is the moment in the first film where the whole character arc stuff just ends. It just stops. And it stays stopped until the very end of the second film. But that still means that you have, like, you have some character. It's not much, it's not new, it's not particularly good, but you at least have something in the first hour of the first film.
Yeah, it's understandable that the death of the Mao's son doesn't really strike as like eventful for us or emotional for us Westerners. But then also, I felt that the other deaths of the soldiers didn't do anything for me, because, yeah, sure, there was this one guy who was a little ha-ha-ha towards Wan Lee about the bullets, that, oh, I'm not gonna give them to you quite yet. There was this little playful banter between the two characters, but that was kind of it, and...
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. Then he dies.
And then that character dies somewhere. And, like, I fully admit that that's not much.
No.
It's a few lines of banter between two characters.
No. So...
But that's at least, it's something. It's 2 lines.
So, not to be a total bitch, but maybe to be a bitch anyway, and making horrible assumptions about the directors of this movie. Just at a glance like this that we are doing right now, it looks like this is a movie which does not even speak to its directors. I think they're in this just for the buck.
I would suspect something alongside of that also.
Yeah.
I don't really see passion.
Because what this movie accomplishes, it accomplishes pretty well the whole propaganda that, look at the Chinese struggles in the Korean War. That part, the action scenes, the US bombings on the train, and shooting indiscriminately on what they're supposing are dead bodies. All that, yeah, points scored there for the home audience, I believe. But then all the rest of it just falls short. Like you said, like I said, the character development, the whole story. Well, we could make the argument that if you want to look at this film in the same way as the Unknown Soldier has that problem too if you approach it that way. Or does it?
I don't side with that notion at all.
Yeah.
Like this is, I'm not on the other side. I'm not even on the other island. There is no there's no a lake of disagreement separating the two of us. We have a whole fucking ocean. I'm a whole completely different continent. To that statement.
Well, Unknown Soldier doesn't have a story, but what it does have, it has the setting of the war, and it has better characters. Let's say it like that.
It also has a way better action. Because gosh darn, if I didn't hate the action.
Is that based on the CGI, which is pretty horrendous, which was, by the way, nominated in the, was it Golden Horse Awards, the CCP Awards?
It's part of, there are multiple things that actually bug me in the action of this film. Part of that is the CGI. I know, like, our last previous episode was Sisu, and I gave a lot of shit to the Finnish CGI in that film. But in Sisu's defense, it had, in my opinion, really weak CGI only in one scene, which is the airplane moment of the film, of that film. But in here, it's that level of CGI throughout the whole shebang. And this is a film that has a lot of CGI. Establishing shots made with CGI.
Yeah.
Action enhanced poorly with CGI. Basically, actiony moments, bullets flying, etc., 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 made with not that great CGI. So that of course is one thing. Another thing is that, in my opinion, the fights here, they just drag on and on. And there is a repeating pattern to the battle scenes in these films. You have the initial attack, the Chinese attack the Americans in whatever location they happen to be it the first encampment, be it the airfield, be it or the airstrip, be it the bridge, what have you. But there is the initial attack, Americans defend, that drags on and on and on. It's like a fucking Duracell bunny, going on and on.
Yeah, especially that fight in the what looks like a small village in the first movie. I think it's like 30 minutes.
Yeah, which just doesn't end.
Yeah.
And when it finally ends, well, it turns out that the Americans just summon reinforcements. This happens constantly. Basically, almost every fight, the Chinese attack, they win the first wave, Americans summon reinforcements, and then the fight is like, we enter the round 2.
Yeah, first and foremost, if not seen as a propaganda movie or something that satisfies the CCP's goals, as this is like a movie that is funded by the CCP as well, this is just pure action. It's an action movie.
Absolutely. It's more action than war film.
Yeah, it's not only the CGI as well. I think some of the choices are quite poor, especially the ones that they utilized in the first movie, where there's these close-ups on iris with, well, CGI, but then there's like these split screens and this kind of disturbing image-in-image takes when the planes are attacking the soldiers when they're on the rocks, trying to hide between the bodies.
Yeah, I also hated the split screen effect that this movie, it doesn't use it too much.
Yeah.
But it has these surprisingly anime moments in it. Like, for example, the split screen moments where everybody is to be an ultra badass. Or when the Chinese artillery hits the Americans, the one guy commanding the said artillery makes some type of a spin motion. Like it's a goddamn Dragon Ball Z episode. I'm wondering what the hell is that?
Yeah, the bullet time death of the brother.
Yeah, that was also pretty damn bad. And one thing that I also really hated in the battle scenes is that they are, in my opinion, cartography-wise, I felt that they were a mess.
Yeah.
Like, the film uses establishing shots when it tries to show you what is the enemy encampment, what stuff do they have tanks, do they have trucks, how they are located in the area that they are controlling, and it tries to show you where the Chinese forces are in comparison to the Americans before the attack. But those moments go over way too fast. It's just a long CGI tracking shot, and that doesn't really give you a clear image of what the area is and what the situation is before the attack happens. And then once the attack happens, it just starts to be all over the place. It's hard to say what is the direction that the Chinese are attacking.
Yeah.
How many squadrons of Chinese are attacking? Where is each squadron attacking? The main attack in the first film, in my opinion, the nighttime attack against the US campment is a prime example of this. The situation is that Chinese are surrounding the American camp from three sides. And then they start to slide down the slope, attacking the Americans. That's what happens historically. That's how the attack went, if you go and look up a Wikipedia article. But you can't actually tell that from the movie itself.
Right.
Because the cinematography is all over the place. And that is a problem that is consistent throughout the film. And also the second one. It's impossible to say where who soldier is at what time.
And where.
Yeah. The Dude X runs in some place. Dude Y throws a grenade into some building. Something explodes in somewhere. 15 Americans die from something in somewhere. It's like constantly like that. There are too many moving parts and not enough establishing done before the fight happens, so that you could actually keep a track what exactly is going on. It's just a collage of different acts of violence.
Yeah.
Something explodes, someone gets shot, somebody shot someone. It's just and rinse and repeat. And at some point, Americans once again summon reinforcements, and the same bullshit just continues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So roughly, what is going on? The first film, it is about getting into the Korean War. There's the call back to war for the kind of older brother character Xian Li, and then Wan Li joins the war against him, but though he doesn't seem to be particularly bothered by that anyway, because it's for the motherland, sort of. And then there's the big cut to the 15th of September 1950, around the time of Battle of Incheon, which is underway. And it's just like a scene after scene after scene after scene about that time period. And the second film, it's more about centers on the whole Watergate Bridge fight, the area to which the Chinese lured the American forces to, and then launched the attack.
Yeah, and in a larger sense, the first film would be the Chosin attack, where the Chinese force the Americans to start their retreat, and the second film would be the Chinese troops trying to stop or prevent the American forces from retreating.
Right. So, yeah, if you're into that kind of stuff, there's like 5.5 hours of it. Something that could have been maybe a successful miniseries, but 2 movies of really nothing.
I would say this is a 3-hour, if not even something like 2.5 hour film stretched out into almost 6 hours of movie.
Yep. And they are also, as far as I read, they are considering, if they haven't released it already, at least considering at this point to release even more longer cuts of these movies.
I dread to think what material there would still be left unused from these 2 movies.
But what is left to be unused in this podcast is the quickies. So, the performance pedestal, who would be the actor of the night?
From my end, that's gonna go to the Americans. It's gonna go to John F. Cruz as Major General Oliver Smith. Because absolutely nobody else in this cast, outside of the one guy playing MacArthur, in a way, actually stayed in my mind.
This is a toughie because I felt that, I felt that the American performances were through and throughout horrendous. And even if I look at the Chinese performances, not knowing any of the Chinese language or Mandarin language, I could see that it seemed to be a little wooden and literary and forced and standoffish. So, what's left? I'll give it to the fake snow. Was good. Well done.
It most definitely did look fake.
Oh, did it? Kind of could have fooled me. But, well, they paid millions of dollars for that, so...
Money well spent, China. For a moment you couldn't actually believe that the temperature in these films would have been in anything below plus 20.
Oh. Well, I have to say that the frostbite makeup was at points like... I was telling to my boyfriend that, it must be a makeup day for the soldiers. What do I know? I wasn't there. Have to put on makeup every once in a while. What worked?
Well, in the first film, the first hour, the personal drama stuff had potential. It could have led into something, could have been interesting, could have had a payoff. At least there was an attempt, and the battle scenes did have good moments. There were good individual things in battle scenes, even though I didn't really like the scenes themselves.
Yeah, many of them were so over the top that it kind of lost me.
Over the top is a good way to describe them. We are watching a superhero movie.
Yes, that's
level of capability here. People, some dudes, like, once again, keep in mind, it's supposed to be minus 30 something, and these guys are running. Somebody is running up a hill, full speed, in minus 30, carrying like a heavy machine gun and a sniper rifle, and he runs for like 15 kilometers.
And there's a lot of, I don't know what's the Chinese equivalent of this, but kind of a kamikaze type of attacks. There's plenty of them. We were complaining about it in the newest Unknown Soldier, that there was, I think, kind of one clear example of that, at least. Here we have like 20.
Yeah, that moment is nothing compared to this movie.
Yeah. So what worked again? I really liked the colors in the first 10 minutes of the first movie. That the hometown vibes, happy atmosphere, and pulling the face of Wan Li. All this kind of playful...
The hometown that in no way looked like bad CGI green screen.
That, unfortunately, yes. You can tell when one is using CGI when it gets all too blurry in the backgrounds.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Like I gave shit to Sisu in the previous episode, but that was just one small scene. It was the moment where the dude is hanging from the airplane, hammering his way inside. Lasted for like 2 minutes.
What didn't work? I think we kind of covered that.
Kind of everything else.
Describe the film in one word.
I say enlightening. It showed me the truth, how that conflict went. I say this completely out of free will.
Well, it's certainly patriotic. Will this film survive the test of time? I don't think so. This is gonna go to the garbage can in a few years.
In China, most likely.
I don't know.
You end up in some camps if you don't religiously watch this movie every Independence Day. Can talk from my experience.
Or is this the kind of film that it's kind of telling of the Chinese movie market, perhaps, at the moment, that there's no other options. So, okay, let's see this movie that has a lot of gravitas because it has 3 very well-known directors in China, and goddamn if there ain't the latest pop singer phenomenon boy playing one of the leads, and then this one guy who also is very prominent in Chinese films at the moment.
It's gonna be the Chinese unknown soldier. Just mark my words.
Speaking of unknown soldier,
don't you dare go there.
There's this certain Lasse Enersen and Tuomas Nikkinen. And what I found with a quick Google search, these 2 people are in the end credits of at least the first movie. And these people, are you ready? Drum roll. Well, Lasse Enersen and Tuomas Nikkinen, at least Lasse Enersen has provided music to Unknown Soldier. I don't see any reference to this movie in his credits on his homepage. Surprise, surprise.
It's a mysterious thing. Then again, bear in mind that as far as I know, IMDb as a website is being owned by the capitalistic dogs.
Yeah, but hey, it would be a good thing if the capitalist dogs would be joining this Communist Party movie. From the communist perspective. Complete the sentence. You really know you're watching the battle at Lake Changjin I II. When? When I'm actually kicking my partner to stay awake. Did you like the film? No.
Nope.
Would you ever rewatch the film? No.
Nope.
Would you recommend the film? No.
Absolutely not.
It's basically a big waste of time. It's an empty shell of a movie. Big ass directors, but nothing came of it except a lot of explosions and mighty action scenes, but that's it.
Yeah. Right there, Ritya. It's overlong. The fight scenes don't make sense. There is no story. Not really. It aims to be, at the end of the day, in my opinion, this one aims to be a war sabotage movie. Something like The Guns of Navarone or The Dirty Dozen. Except the film has too big of a cast, the fights are too numerous, they drag on too long, and they just can't craft into itself those twists and turns and suspense that Navarone and Dirty Dozen and others or Inglorious Bastards have. It doesn't really have characters, to a point where I can't remember any character's name. I constantly was referring these with code words. Like I had in my notes my characters lists as Radio, who is the guy who had the radio, Eyeball, who is the one guy who goes blind, Pistol, who is the older brother, we have Bazooka, we have Please Die, which is the younger brother that I couldn't stand, we have Hearing Aid, and then we have that one asshole with no distinguishing features whatsoever, which is every other soldier that they have in this battalion of something like, what, 300? 500? 1500?
Yeah. And the sad thing is that you could actually, I'm sure you could make an interesting movie about the subject matter. There is no lack of material here. You could make stuff here, but it's not here.
It's not here, and there's a lot that is not actually here, and that's also the environment. The movie is heavily shrouded into the historical fact that these battles, they went on in minus 30 to minus 40 degrees. So it was freezing as fuck, is what I'm trying to say here, when these fights went on. That's kind of the main thing here. That's the big obstacle that everybody has to go around. That is the most lethal element on the battlefield in the battles that these films depict.
Mm.
And like that film tries to convey this to you, that the film says as much to you. Quite often, in fact, but you don't actually ever see the effects of that cold. That the film tells you that it's really cold, but on the visual level, it looks like this has been shot in a studio with plus 15 to plus 20. The breathing with these characters, it never actually makes that steam.
Yeah, sometimes.
And I didn't see that ever.
Oh, it's there.
The film makes the case that they don't have food rations and they are starving, but they never actually showcase any limitation from this. The film depicts that they lose their equipment, their guns, but you never actually see a moment where they would want to shoot fire at the Americans, but they just don't have the guns, or they don't have the bullets. They lose the artillery in an airstrike at the beginning of the second film. And they immediately just seize more artillery and cannons from the Americans in the next 30 minutes. They make the remark that it's so fucking cold out there that their boatlock rifles will freeze up and refuse to operate. And then the battle scene begins, and the said boatlock rifles just operate just fine.
Yeah.
It's constantly... these are movies that constantly tell you that there's an obstacle facing these troops, but then in practice, that never actually shows up in any way.
Yeah, there's no stakes.
Yeah, none at all. And that also harms the moments because later on, because this movie also tries to give you this really heartfelt, oh please cry now, hero death moments. But because there's no stakes and there's no characters, you don't feel anything. The older brother dies at the very end of the second film. And I was checking my watch. And that was supposed to be like almost the closing of a character arc. Of two characters' character arcs. That we have waited the payoff for almost 6 hours. And I was bored out of my mind. And also, as a final insult, this goes to basically all war movies. The Korean conflict is not really interesting. Again, that is a shared problem of war cinema. Like, no major conflict is really that interesting. Vietnam War, not interesting.
Not interesting?
Iraq War, not interesting.
Ooh.
Korean War, not interesting. Second World War, not interesting. The First World War, not interesting at all. In the history of mankind, there are only, I can name 3 interesting and important battles or wars. And those would be the Great Emu War of 1932, the Gombe-Chimpanzee War of 1974 to 1978, and the Winter War.
Okay. Second World War, not interesting enough.
Not interesting at all. A serious question, who gives a fuck about that conflict?
Okay, I get the vibe that you're not a war movie guy much after all. We have watched...
I'm a war movie guy if the war movies would depict interesting conflicts. Like, once again, I ask, where is my movie about the Gombe-Chimpanzee War? I swear to God, someday my boy Goldie will be avenged. And he will get the cinematic justice that he deserves.
Boy, that would be a movie. But it would be completely in CGI.
No, it would be practical. I would train the chimpanzees. Somehow. In fact, I wouldn't even use CGI blood. No, sticking true to what I said back in the Cannibal Holocaust episode, I would use actual animal on animal violence. Oh, the blood would be real. But to say actually something in today's film's Battle at Lake Changjin's defense, as my closing statement surrounding the movie, the discourse around this movie has revolved heavily around the theme of, is this movie propaganda or is it not? And that's also, propaganda is also a word that we have repeatedly used today throughout this episode. We have talked about the propagandistic aspects of this movie. So to return back into that topic once more, as a final thing that I will bring up, is Battle at Lake Changjin propaganda? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Is it as hideous, as disgusting propaganda that as many of the American sources have painted it out to be? In my opinion, honestly, no. It's boring more than it's effective, and when it comes to the propagandistic nature of it, it's actually extremely tame. It's no different at the end of a day from what you get from an American production, something like the TV show 24 or movies like We Were Soldiers or some other heavily patriotic American production. At the end of the day, you hear a lot about the propagandistic nature of this movie if you check out the American critics and American sources, but those are hyped, in my opinion, very strongly.
Oh boy.
And the propagandistic nature of here, at the end of the day, if you choose to watch this movie, and I caution you not to, but if you decide to do it, I would maintain that the propagandistic nature is the most exciting thing on screen here. Not because it's that heavy on propaganda, not because the propaganda is that good, but because propaganda, while it conveys the message that the creator of the said propaganda wants to convey, it also, it works as a mirror. It always also reveals something about the creator of the said propaganda. And usually, the aspects that it highlights, if you read closely, if you look at the propagandistic piece closely, usually the things that end up highlighting from about the author, they are not actually that nice. They usually show the darker side of the creator. It goes into American propagandistic or overtly patriotic war movies. Of course you get the message that the film wants to convey to you, but at the same time, on close reading of the material, you also notice the less glamorous sides of Americans and the US. You find the idea how America is the largest superpower ever, how it's the chosen people of the God, how that gives it a special privilege, how everybody is a lesser when compared to American. You can have a civilian bombing that costs 20,000 lives on a movie, but you are supposed to only cry when American soldier Jake or Paul finally bites it in the action. These are the things that the film doesn't intend to tell you, but if you look at it closely enough, you actually find them there. And same happens to Battle at Lake Changjin. It wants to be pro-China propaganda that is pushed onto the market, and on a surface level, that's what it is. And that's the message it conveys. But if you look at the film, if you choose to watch the movie, and if you look at it more closely, you actually also find more harming and more condemning statements when it comes to China as a nation. And the realization that you may find, or what that I found, was that China really is not that different from the US as a nation. Not really. Not beneath or the surface. Especially in the global political sphere. I remember that early 2000s there was a lot of China hype. There was a lot of statements were made how China is this super smart player on global political field, how it's the country that has a 50-year plan. Every political move that China makes is made in accordance of the 50-year plan. Every movement is tacticized with such a long scale. They look 50 years forward before they make a political decision. And that was hyped as something that makes China and Chinese politicians superior to the Western counterparts. And there was a growing demand that we in the West would also, we would have to take a page from Chinese playbook and also start to view our political moves with 50-year plans of our own. I remember this discourse happening, and well, that is true. China has a 50-year plan. It would be smart if we would have it also. Looking at this film, however, it's also evident that just like America, also China lives in 50 years in the fucking past. They have a stick up their ass still even today at this point, like almost, well, not forgotten, but age-old battle. Something that you actually could, and in my opinion should, move past off, but which they are incapable of doing. And China is not the only one at fault here. America does the same thing, Finland does the same thing with its unknown, etc. So it's kinda like a universal problem for every nation. I'm not saying that China is somehow makes here a mistake unique only to them. But I do make the case that now, having watched almost 6 hours of Chinese war propaganda, yeah, it also showcases to you that China is not necessarily deserving of all the hype that West has wanted to give to it for something like the past perhaps 50 to 20 years.
Well, it's right what you're saying about the whole, that there's a certain level of hypocrisy if we are listening to the Western or the American media responding to this movie very, I don't know, furiously, but they have some straight opinions about it, that this is pure Chinese propaganda. But then again, the film, how it depicts its enemy, as we've said, it really shows their faces. It technically just shows their faces. There are moments like in Unknown Soldier, you don't necessarily see even the enemy's faces. They're just kept at a distance. This movie doesn't do that. And I think also one of the reasons why they do that, while not completely really humanizing them, they make them more palatable for the rest of the world, because this is clearly targeted for a worldwide audience. And I would say that's the key reason why that is.
That can of course be.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to play good guy points to China here like any more than is necessary.
Yeah.
Like, most likely, I agree with you. Most likely, the reasons why the Americans get humanized here as much as they are is because this is a movie that has been meant for the international market.
Yeah. And if it wasn't already clear earlier that if you would remove the propaganda from this film, the film would still not be good. The propaganda is definitely not my only gripe about the film. It's just that it happens to be a really dull film.
Then actually, the propaganda might be the most interesting thing at display here. I'm looking especially that this uplifting and spiritual closing text scroll of the second film, where it states that Battle of Sunbridge was a typical interpenetrating attack into the depth of US defense.
Typical, yeah.
Typical! That's the word that they use. It was a typical interpenetrating attack. And the attack is a complete fucking disaster. Absolutely. They sacrificed the whole goddamn squad. Every single man except one dies when they try to sabotage that bloody bridge. And at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter, because the Americans just fix it right away the next day. A typical interpenetrating attack into the depths of US defense. Jesus Christ, China!
And the first movie goes at the end with the titles The Great Spirit of the War to Resist US Aggression and aid North Korea will eternally be renewed. Eternal glory to the great martyrs of the People's Volunteer Army. End quote. And definitely the most heinous part, the most in-your-face propaganda in these movies is the end titles. And that's kind of the taste with which you will leave the theater. So I understand the gripes in that sense. But if you look at the overall movie, well, was the propaganda really that strong when you compare it to many of the American war movie counterparts. Maybe not.
No, not. And I say that as a person who doesn't have a special problem against propagandistic content.
Yeah.
Like, I am someone who owns as a physical copy the entire TV series 24.
Ugh.
And that's nothing if not pro-American propaganda. So I am fully capable of enjoying propagandistic content. This just is a shit content.
Well, I guess we could debate whether this has more historical inaccuracies than your average American war film. Because this kind of does. And then doesn't. It's also kind of a matter of interpretation. Like we discussed, it doesn't tell you who was the starter of the war. Kind of avoids that actually conveniently.
Yeah, that's it only paints the starter from the Chinese perspective.
Yeah,
it states that for the Chinese, that they started to respond into an American aggression.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So it's like clearly they don't want to touch on the topic who started the war, but they kind of sneakily turn it into, oh, we have to respond to this aggression.
And the film does have a fair share of those moments also. It's not just that. Another big example from that ballpark, in my opinion, would also be the winter clothing of the Chinese troops, where not too much is shown to you why exactly the Chinese troops don't have their padded winter jackets as they enter the Korean territory. And later on the film tries to make the argument. It shows you the one general who refuses to put on a padded winter jacket because the ground troops don't yet have received theirs, so I will suffer like my men over there in the battlefields type of situation. Then very next scene, with the same general, he now is wearing a winter jacket. So there are these moments where the movie makes a noticeable effort not to mention certain things surrounding the conflict.
Yeah. Well, still coming back to the characters, there's something to be said for your average Hollywood war movie where I think that the characters tend to be just way more complex, even if the movie kind of comes off as war propaganda or is war propaganda. And I guess we could get into the complexities of how you interpret the word propaganda, blah, blah, blah. But generally, definitely the American war movies, if going by these goddamn movies, these two movies that we watched, the American war movies are more interesting because the characters have more depth. There's also this inter-reflection or reflection on the moments. Like, there are some fighters who are openly maybe already against the war, or they're complaining about the war or the situations, which is more interesting, frankly, than watching these monotone cardboard characters in the Battle of Lake Changjin, where it's just about this whole thing for the motherland. I don't see these characters truly struggle and what comes with the struggle, like those words that the Mao would not want to hear.
Yeah, the closest of that, any type of such of a sentiment in here, I don't know if it would be like the moment when Mao loses his eldest son, and we return back to Mao as after he has heard the news of his son's demise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm really I get what you are going for. I can't disagree with that. I'm really grasping at straws when I try to look at these films or think back upon these films and try to find a moment where it would actually attempt to do something like that.
Well, to widen the scope here, wide open, Chinese movies and how they are influenced by Hollywood movies. Do we want to touch on that horse? Because clearly there are some sentiments online that the Chinese movies, yes, they try to be very much like the Hollywood blockbuster counterparts. big action sets, a lot of effects, a lot of CGI, and similar types of effects all across the board. So is this something that they just shouldn't be doing? Because we have already Hollywood doing that, and Hollywood usually doing it much better. Hollywood doing better CGI apparently. Somehow the CGI seems to suck in the Chinese movies that I've seen. So why not just try to do more of your own thing? Because all the bullet time, all the American influences are there. And you might fairly ask, well, Americans are doing it, why wouldn't we be doing it? Why shouldn't we be doing it as a Chinese person? Sure, but I think there's something just lost here. There's a lot of that we want to be as good as the Hollywood movies. We want to reach the same level. Competition going on here.
Yeah, I don't think that any nation, be it the China, be it Finland, like it was in the last episode, should automatically give up on the attempt to rival the Hollywood movies. Yeah. I do think that that's a like obviously the battle at Lake Changjin, it wants to be a Hollywood blockbuster. It wants to do what Hollywood does, and it can't crack it. I don't think that it's an absolutely doomed cause. However, I do believe that China can make an American-esque blockbuster. I do think that Finland can make American-esque blockbusters. Sisu came, in my opinion, extremely close. But the problem, in my opinion, is that you can't take the American blockbuster blueprint and just replicate it in China or in Finland or any other country, like one-on-one.
Yeah.
You have to kinda have the interest first, before you make the attempt of copying Hollywood outside of Hollywood. You have to start with the deep introspection into what really is the essence of your nation, of your people. Once you can figure that one out, then you can perhaps start to figure out how you have to change the American Hollywood blockbuster blueprint, how you have to tinker it so that it actually becomes a serviceable version, your country's serviceable version of a Hollywood blockbuster. This is what, in my opinion, Sisu actually started doing. It did stumble a bit, but in my opinion, it actually came pretty damn close to cracking the code, like I said in previous episode. And I don't think that Sisu is the only way how we can make, for example, American action movie, but it shows us one way, one route that we can take in order to make American-esque action movies. And that also, in my opinion, goes into when Finland tries to do Hollywood blockbuster, when Finland tries to do superhero movies. That's how we have to approach the task. And that is my message also to China. Don't take American blueprint one for one and just try to replicate it in China. But first, look at what really is the essence and the spirit of China and Chinese people. Figure that shit out, and then take the American blueprint and see how you have to change it.
There you go. Well, anything else, or should we say, or hear rather, what our listeners would be thinking about these two films?
I can't wait for the comment section.
Yeah, come and tell us your comment on the comment section. If not, fine. But you could at least tell to your friends out there who might be interested in this kind of topics to come and listen to our podcast. Tell to all of your film nerds in your close vicinity and circles. And if you think this content was extremely valuable, you could also drop by and give that rating on Apple Podcasts. Blah. Henrik, apart from the Chinese propaganda or the Flick Lab propaganda, I think the Chinese propaganda just keeps on going in the next one.
Oh god.
Oh God. Do you want to avoid that bullet? Are you ready for more?
I have said this before, and I will say it again. Idea of watching propaganda films, usually it sounds more fun than it in the end is in practice.
Yeah.
But fine, if you have something lining up, we can continue. I have a inkling suspicion what you are planning here.
Yep.
And fine, we can go with that crazy plan. But I'm already saying, if you are thinking the films, I suspect you are. Let me say, I haven't seen them, but I am already confident that the idea of watching them is more fun than the actual act of watching them.
There's two ways we could go with the two films, Wolf Warrior and Wolf Warrior 2, starring Wu Jing, who was in the leading role in these movies, so more of that guy. Or we could look at the My trilogy, My People, My Country, My People, My Homeland, and My Country, My Parents. And each of those movies are almost 3 hours, and they are pure China glorifying itself, the 75th anniversary trilogy propaganda.
I don't know, fuck it, let's go with Wolf Warrior. It's only 2 movies.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can master the enthusiasm to watch 3.
I bet it's gonna be more interesting because there's more like a Chinese action movie hero guy versus the bad American guy. Kind of like this, but more like a one-on-one.
So it's once again China trying to do American blockbuster.
Yeah.
I just can't wait.
I hope this is more entertaining.
I'm not getting my hopes too high.
Thank you for joining us. See you in the next one.
Until then. Jesus Christ, China! Ja, katko sen nauhuri?
Yes.